Kurt, for this week's Pro Basketball Talk Extra. We're talking draft, we're talking declining trade options, we're talking Bradley Beal, of course. But first and foremost, how are you doing? How's everything going over there?
It's okay. This is the busy time of year. The next few weeks are everybody. It's the number of my friends who are like, "Well, the finals are over, so your job you're off for the summer." I'm like, "Yeah, that is not how this works." It is not just me. I mean, if you talk to Florio and the football guys, or with any sport, like free agency drives stuff so much now, and trades and draft. The NFL might be the best at turning the draft into a whole second season, right?
The whole thing.
Yeah. So it's crazy. So it doesn't slow down till like whenever free agency starts to slow down after summer league somewhere mid-July. The pace slows down. I was texting a friend this morning, just like, hey, pick an early August date where we can just go to a Dodger game and have a beer and hang out and watch a game and not do anything.
You're like looking at your calendar. You're like, wait, no, maybe I'm in town, perhaps.
Yeah. So what about you? How you been, man? What's been up?
Same old. I've been going to a lot of museums, looking at a lot of art. I was looking at this one artist. He was a Chinese artist, and his name, let me just make sure I'm saying it correct. It's Chen Hongshu. Have you heard of Chen Hongshu?
That is not a name I'm familiar with.
Okay, well, I mean, he was born in 1598.
Okay.
so if you had him, I would have been absolutely amazed if you had. But this guy, I'm telling you, I looked at this work out of nowhere. There's a show at the Met, and there are 4 or 5 pieces by him. 4 little pieces, like 4 little drawings, and then like a big portrait when he was in his early. I think he was like 21 when he did this. Apparently, he started painting when he was 4. He was like a child prodigy, and he is one of the greatest painters I've ever seen. Like I've ever seen. And I only have 5 things to look at, and I'm still, every time I go back, I've seen it multiple times now. I even brought a friend. I was like, look how crazy this guy's work is. It's absolutely mind blowing. So I've never really seen anything like this guy's painting before. So I've just been enamored with that. So that's kind of what I've been using all my mental capacity for when it's not put towards basketball or sports. It's just kind of what was Chin doing? This guy was unbelievable.
My wife and I are trying to get up to the Broad in LA to see. There's a Keith Haring. Haring exhibit that she's very into. So we're hoping to get up there in the next, in my free time in the next week, which we just discussed is non-existent. We're going to try to figure something out.
Yeah, it's been 7 minutes at the Broad. But there's a lot happening in the NBA. So let's just dive right into it. Bradley Beal.
Yeah.
Trade going to Phoenix. Wow. What are your thoughts on this? Just before we get into it, Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, and several second-round picks in the pick swap is what has been reported.
Right, and they're still kind of hammering it out. It sort of depends on what they think they can get for Chris Paul going back. First off, you want to start with Phoenix or Washington? Which side do you want to start?
Let's start with Phoenix. Let's start with Phoenix, and then we can go to Washington.
All right, for Phoenix. All right, my first thought is I get why you do this because you just stole Bradley Beal, right? Like considering what Donovan Mitchell went for, what Kevin Durant went for, what Rudy Gobert goes for, he's been injured the last couple of years. He hasn't been playing at the same level, but you were still talking, even then, it's a top 30 player. At worst, he's a top 30 NBA player. And maybe he bounces back. And you're getting him for an aging Chris Paul whose contract isn't guaranteed and some second rounders. I mean, that's an absolute steal. But I just don't know. Corey, do you love the fit? Do you see this lifting them up?
I think they could be good.
Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying. Like technically, yes, I see what you're saying as far as the apples to apples comparison of like what superstars, quote unquote superstars, go for in the NBA. This is a paltry sum. However, I think his contract is wild, and we understand that there are several other players on that Phoenix team who also have wild max contracts. So that to me is kind of like, I mean, if you're thinking about adding a third player at 45,
Yeah.
In a scaling contract. I mean, so let's just say on average $50 million a year, and he's your third player. I'm just gonna let that sink in. Like that to me is not a steal. That to me is like you're hemorrhaging cash. We're all in supernova time. Let's just absolutely destroy all future prospects of what does longevity or sustainability look like, long-term thinking. We're not interested in any of those concepts. Endurance, no. We want to do a scorched earth approach before the CBA and just hemorrhage cash. And on our third guy, and we talk about this in Philadelphia, like why is Tobias Harris making so much money? Like this is the question in Phoenix that I'm asking right now.
I think I got 3 concerns with this. As good as, by the way, I still think they're, I don't want to sell this short. I still think they're a top 3, top 4 team in the West. They're getting to the second round. The question for me, because if you're bringing him in, you're saying, I'm a title team, right? Like we're all in for the title.
Yeah, that's where you go.
And so when you get to the final 8, my concerns are this. A, the obvious one is just health. Beal has had health issues the last couple of years. Durant's had health issues. I mean, right. It's not just, hey, like the Nuggets could suffer injuries. And there's a long injury history of guys on this team. 2, the whole CBA now, the new CBA coming in is set up to stop this kind of team.
This right here, this we're talking about.
Exactly. And it is designed to limit your options, which kind of ties us right in out. They're willing to pay it, but this isn't. Ballmer's been willing to pay it for years, right? And the Warriors have been willing to pay it, and they've won with it. But the new CBA is like, no, we're going to like tie your hands, so you can't. Even starting this year, if you're over that time, they're not going to be able to use the mid-level exception. They can't do all this stuff to get players. And the third thing is, it ties back into that. Corey, we just watched them. They were the only team to take 2 games off the Nuggets in the postseason. They got bounced because they aren't deep enough. They're not deep enough now, and they can't get deeper. They were going to have minimum contracts, and they can re-sign Josh Okogie and Jacques Landale and just pay through the nose for these guys and accept it basically just bite the bullet for a year or 2 and hope to win. I don't think they're going to be deep enough. I don't think they're going to be good enough against what Boston can be, what Milwaukee can be, what Denver has proven they are, what I think other teams can get to. Like, they're capable, I guess, of winning it all, but Corey, everything has to go right for them because they just don't have any depth. And I don't know if that's, let's put it this way. I don't know if it's sustainable for them, and I don't think the Denver Nuggets are freaking out. I just don't think they're like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's a very pricey number 3 option, in my personal opinion. I will say, however, I think they're going to be really good. I mean, a title team, that's the question of like, because that's the whole point. Like, you're right. I think the premise is we're trying to win a championship. Can they do that? I mean, I think they have, even with the lack of a deep bench, I'm sitting here looking at this thinking, it's like a really good team. So I want to see how things mature. That's kind of my word for Phoenix is, maturity, maturation. I want to understand. Let's check in game 30. Let's check in game 6. I want to see how they play together, how they gel together. Because that's one thing in these super teams that we just haven't necessarily. That's always been like the missing ingredient is like time and chemistry. Something in some concoction.
Yeah.
Like so, I'm curious. I think it can work though. It's just gonna cost them literally everything. It's gonna be like this is the deal with the devil kind of thing. It's like, hey, I'll give you my soul. I'll have 3 max contracts, and I don't have a bench. Everyone's on rookie contracts or minimum contracts, and give us a championship, and the fans will pay for the next 20 years, but everyone will remember this team will be immortal. That's kind of what I'm seeing here, and I think it could work. And it's just, who would want to pay that bill?
Yeah.
I got Matt Ishbia, but
yeah. Yeah, it is the flags fly forever theory, right? Like if we just get
except for they don't like if we talk about this all the time, like who won in 1984, who won in like 1963. Like I can just throw out random
record. I happen to know.
Yeah, exactly. Anything in the 60s are fair, fine. You're right. Celtics every year. The Celtics by 1 million. But you're right. But it is kind of an interesting question of like, yeah, like do they really fly forever? But anyways,
Yeah.
and what is the cost to a community? But those are questions that philosophers get paid to ask. Now, what about Washington? What do you think this does to? Because clearly, there's a lot of change happening there, and there's been change happening there. When will it stop, Kurt?
Not close, not soon. First off, they've taken a lot of heat for not getting much back in return for this. And I would like to right now just absolve Anthony Winger. Or I'm sorry, Michael Winger. I got his name wrong. Michael Winger, the new GM. It isn't on him. This is a Ted Leonsis owner problem because you gave Bradley Beal the no trade clause. And the second you gave him the no trade clause, he got to control this. You could have picked Miami, who had a couple of first-round picks, and maybe you get Tyler Hero, and that seems they didn't get much back, like we talked about. But it's, to me, still the right move. Just rip the Band-Aid off. You've got to rebuild. It's painful. That's the way this is going to be. Kyle Kuzma, we can talk about guys who opted out. Kyle Kuzma has wisely opted out of his $13 million. They're not going to keep him. They might re-sign him at. He'll probably make what do you think? $20 million-ish a year. Kyle. I mean, he had a really good year. So
yeah, really. Yeah, he matured a lot there.
Yeah. So let's say $20 million, give or take. I'd re-sign him to trade him, either in a sign and trade or just outright trade him. Sign him back and then over the summer or next season, just at the deadline, trade him. And the same, frankly, with Kristaps Porzingis, who had a sneaky, really good year last year. He could opt in. He could look at the craziness of this and choose I think he's got 35, 36 million. He could opt in. You're not keeping either of them. You just, at this point, get back what you can for them, right? Get back draft picks and young players. Rip off the Band-Aid and rebuild. And I think it's the right move. Corey, I also think it's like the most Wizards thing ever to wait for the draft after Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson and Brandon Miller go, oh, now we're in.
Washington. I don't know what to do. I can't even follow up on that. So let's just go straight to Ja Morant. Finally, we have a decision, suspended 25 games. When you saw this, what did you think?
That was the number, just talking to other media around the finals, that was the number we thought of as the under-over. Like, it's going to be right around there. That would have been my bet. So I'm not really surprised by it. Corey, do you think it's right, too low, too high?
I think it's too low, but I think, once again, the reality of the situation is that, looking at past, how do I say this? Looking at how Adam Silver has handled some of these really big, high-profile suspensions or penalties in the past, it seems as though he's one who really understands the weight of precedent, and I think this could be very clearly a move to protect the league and, most importantly, protect the players moving forward. Because the precedent looking backwards would be like Gilbert Arenas, you get suspended for indefinitely, which ended up being a year, and then it completely derails your career. A couple years later, you're out of the league, right? That's kind of like, so that is very heavy-handed, considering that Ja is very young, considering that he's a face of the NBA, one of the big faces of the NBA, the entire league. I could understand why he would want to be very conservative in his judgment to then set a course correct. I do think, however, in these instances, the private market, right, will then be the one who steps in, and so I think this is going to see. We'll see what Powerade does. We'll see what Nike. I think all the sponsors. I think the team. Those penalties, I think, will be the ones that then make it commensurate with what he did.
Yeah, and Nike's already. I mean, they released his signature shoe, but not with the fanfare signature shoes usually get released with. But also, I know they pulled a couple of colorways just off the site already. They were going to release various ones that are just not available now. So there is some impact there. And yeah, I'm with you. I think it's a delicate issue to how do you guide someone to maturity, because I'm not sure what that answer is. And if not getting all NBA and not getting 39 million doesn't do that, where's the self-reflection? The reports have been he feels the league and some people are out to, and some people in the media are out to get him. And I'm like, maybe there's some people in the media out to get you. I'm not. I don't think most of us are. You keep putting yourself in the situation where you get yourself, like, I'm not sure. I'm just not sure how you guide that and how easy it is. And I don't know him personally, but like, how do you guide someone to self-reflection like that? Or is it just, again, is that just maturity in time? Is that just something that happens? I would think $39 million would slap you across the face, but apparently it didn't. So.
And then now with Memphis, they continue to make moves around the edges. We saw the action with Dylan Brooks, now with Tyus Jones, rumored to be traded. It's a rumor, but it is an interesting question. What do you think they're doing over there?
Tyus Jones is a weird one because personally, I think he's the best backup point guard in the NBA. That becomes, isn't this the problem they run into? And I think every team the CBA is starting to build up on, they're going to have to pay Desmond Bane. By the way, fantasy players out there, get Desmond Bane to start your season because somebody's got to fill in those points that Jaw's not getting, and Bane's going to get a lot of them. At some point, it's hard to keep the best backup point guard in the league on the roster because somebody else is like, well, we'll take him to start, right? Like, so I get why you try to start doing this. It kind of depends on what's coming back. I'd be surprised to see him traded in the short term. But in the long term, it's just hard to keep somebody that good. He's really good, and he's not as good as Ja. So where do you draw that line? Like, at what point do you just go, but let's see what we can do and bring in, and the new CBA will start to hit them too. What's more affordable because they've got to pay Ja. Well, not even got to. They've extended Ja at the max. They can extend him for. Bane's going to make money. Like, you already got Steven Adams on a huge contract, and you're going to want to keep it. I think we saw how much he matters to this team right now. Like, you've got to keep him at some price. So things are going to get expensive. And backup point guard, is that a place you can spend real money?
No, we've learned that in Chicago.
Yeah,
we learned that lesson a lot. So let's go to Draymond, shall we? I feel like there are a couple people who we always talk about on the pod. And Draymond Green's one of them. He declined his player option. The new GM, Mike Dunleavy Jr. for the Golden State Warriors, been vocal. Hey, we want Draymond back. What do you think is the reality of that scenario?
I think the reality is he comes back because when you start listing out, part of it is they want him and they need him and they can pay him, and they've got to have a conversation about where that number is. Is it, he was going to make 26.7, and can you get him back at?
Yeah, I think 27.6 actually.
Well, 27.6. What? Can you get him back at roughly that number? Can you do 3 years at 75 to 80 million in that range and get him back for that same number and keep him happy because he's got the security of years? Because the teams that could go get him, Corey, like, he gets linked to LeBron James and Lakers all the time. They could offer him a mid-level exception for $12 million. Do you want to take a massive pay cut to go play with LeBron? Do you want to take, and the teams that can pay him, Houston could pay him. Do you want to go to a rebuilding team where you're not? And the other thing, Corey, we've talked about this. He's not plug and play, right? He's not.
Well, we don't know. We don't know.
Fair. Well, I don't think he is. I don't think he's a guy. I mean, his skill set, he's an elite defender still, but he kind of he can defend multiple positions, but he's also kind of the quarterback, right? He's a guy who's calling out defenses and guiding guys. He's a really elite passer, but he's not a secondary passer in particular, but he's not a great scorer shooter. So you've kind of got to use him in a certain role. With a rebuilding Rockets team, is that or Orlando or teams, Spurs, the teams with cap space, is that the fit?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've only seen him right there, so I don't necessarily know what he would look like in a different system, but on paper, theoretically, in a classroom environment, yes, it's very difficult to think. Obviously, you think great basketball players play well together. So in that sense, it's not too difficult to think of a way to use him well. But if we're talking like, dynasty championship level, can you carry that over? That is when it starts getting a little like, I don't know. Like, I know he's going to be good somewhere else, but like, what as good as he was for the Warriors, that's a different question.
Yeah, he's such a perfect fit for them, and I just don't. The other part of it, Corey, you watched them last year. They can't win without him, right?
Yeah, no. So the Warriors, yeah, they're in such a weird, they're in a very strange moment, But yes, short answer is yes, they need Draymond. And he's like the glue, which is like a really it's funny, like Kevin Looney and Draymond are like two unsung heroes of that roster as far as like culture and glue guys, and it's even when Steph's putting up crazy numbers, like they're still kind of like, and then Clay can go off on a crazy game and they're still kind of like, so it's like an interesting mix, like what makes them go from okay to the best. It's like a couple of guys here and there. Very, very interesting.
Corey, did we just trade Jordan Poole during this conversation?
Man.
Because if you bring back Draymond, can you bring back Jordan?
Wow. This is one of those really tough scenarios for me because we're talking about a development story, right?
Yeah.
Such great promise. But then this past season, I feel like Jordan Poole and Tyler Hero for me are I'm thinking of them in the same way, where I'm like, you just stop time after like last season or something like that. I'm like, wow, like this, boom, the world is there. And then now I'm like, not so much. I don't know.
Yeah. No,
it's crazy how 1 year can change everything. That's why some of these guys, like, we're talking about Bruce Brown, for instance. Bruce Brown declines his player options. He's set to hit free agency. He just won a championship with the Nuggets. We know he's a great role player. In Brooklyn, he was a great role player, even though they were not very good. And he was a great role player in Denver. But he's doing the exact same thing Jeremy Grant did, right? I mean, it's just, I don't know why this happens in Denver all the time. It's like guys go there, they have one great season, then they hit the market, and then like we don't hear from them again.
Yeah, Bruce Brown. To be fair, two things. He was really good in Brooklyn before that. Like this was a guy.
Yeah, really good in Brooklyn.
Yeah, he's looked good for a couple places. The other part of it is you got to grab the bag when you can grab the bag, man. He has made $15.2 million over the course of his 5 years in the NBA. His starting salary next year is in that ballpark. Like the floor for him is the mid-level exception, which is going to be, I think, 12.2, around $12 million. You're just going from rich to generational wealth to, you know what I mean? Like you're going to my kids don't have to worry about money phase. And you can't, I don't know, if I'm Bruce Brown and I'm advising Bruce Brown, frankly, if I'm Aaron Gordon, I'm Bruce Brown's buddy, you got to tell him to take the money. Go take the money, because the risk of the most Denver can offer him under the new CBA is 7.8. And you could try a wink and wink. Hey, sign for 7.8. Wink, wink. You do a 1+1, and then he can opt out and re-sign, like what James Harden is doing, what other guys have done. You do this, we'll bring you back and we'll take care of you. But that's a risk. That's an injury risk. That's if Denver want, like a million things could change in that year, and then you don't get. I just think when that first big payday comes, you can't. Maybe there's people out there. Jaylen Brown might say no and think about moving on from. No, he's not. He's gonna take the money. Like, if he's unhappy in a year or two, he'll ask for a trade. But he's taking the money, man.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it is interesting though. As like to follow that the mindset, the thinking from beginning of the career to the end of the career, and how priorities and things change.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, Draymond Green, the idea of a 3-year deal sitting at roughly $27 million a year. The core pitch point there is stability, right? And I do think, when you're thinking about a guy in his 30s, like, do I want to go to a different city every year? Do I want to like live on the road, and my kids are going to school and I can't see my spouse? Like you're talking about like quality of life stuff for someone who already has made $100+ million. So it is an interesting question. But to your initial point, I'd love to hear what you think. Green or Poole, can they coexist next year?
I don't think so. I also think you've got Poole's extension kicks in next year, and he makes I think it's 28.7. So he makes a bunch, right? Like he's about to 27.8, whatever. He makes a huge amount of money starting next year. If you're the Warriors and you're worried about depth and money, like is that someone where you can trade him to a team and get a couple of young players and a pick or whatever and lower your tax bill and get a little depth with guys you can throw in? I'm just not sure you can. I'm not sure you can run it back. I'm not in the locker room. I am not. Mike Dunleavy Jr. and Kirk Lacove and the people running out there, they've got to sit down and have an honest conversation with people. Like, can you really get past this? But that might be a place. For me, from the outside, I'm just not. It clearly affected them last year, and I can't risk another year of Curry's prime on it. What about we haven't talked about, Corey? We talked about this, the WNBA. Like, have you got to watch some games?
Brandon Stewart.
Holy cow!
I mean, yeah, we're just so lucky to be alive. There are some players where I really do think I'm just so lucky to watch, like Messi play soccer, or now like Mbappe, and then I'm sitting here, I'm just so lucky to have watched Rafael Nadal play. And then now I'm thinking I'm just so lucky to watch like Brandon Stewart play. She's been sensational in her debut season in Liberty. Just sensational.
Yeah. Where is she's like, it's a weird thing to say, but in a city with Aaron Judge and all these star players, like she's got to be top 5 best athlete in the city, like in her sport. Like she is ridiculous. Even in New York.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I feel like you're definitely on to something there, which is an interesting question as far as like marketing wise. I would disagree, but as far as like going out there and doing the job, like clearly top 5. Like she's been unbelievable in New York. Yeah. So it is, but now you have Aaron Rodgers though in New York as well.
That's true. Aaron Rodgers, Jalen Brunson probably is on that list. Yeah. Who are you putting on that list? It's an interesting discussion. But she's got to be in the conversation. She has been unbelievable for them.
Yeah, and then the one question that I think has been very fascinating to follow, because this is a question that happened in the NBA. Oh, wow, that was 30 years ago. The question of charter travel. So we've seen a couple different reports. We know some teams like the Aces were doing the JSX, right. And then they couldn't do it anymore on certain flights. And then we saw, the Mercury had the option to do a couple just because of Brittany Griner coming back, and just as far as security concerns, especially now after that confrontation with that YouTube influencer in Dallas. But then that has been drawn for wider calls of, hey, like why doesn't every team have charter airfare in the WNBA? What have you thought about this question in the WNBA?
To me, it ties into a bigger conversation we've had about the WNBA and the increasing exposure and other things. It's time to grow up. It is time to start doing the things big time leagues do if you're going to be a big time league, and charter flights, getting your players to the next destination timely and rested matters. It's just time. It is just time for them to. It's an expense. Yes, it's a healthy expense. It's time to do it. It is time. If you're going to be this level of professional league and ratings are up and you're going to start capitalizing on this, you've got to get your best foot forward. And that means charter flights is just part of the marketing and a bunch of other things that they just need to do better to take advantage of this moment. I don't know how.
It's just interesting, when you think about this is one of those conversations that I would love to be, privy to some of these conversations as far as like just like what's it, fly on the wall.
Yeah.
When you have, this happens in the NBA too, player demands and then the business goals, or just basic like business principles of like, we just may not make that much money. So like, as far as like, so that's why I think is like an interesting kind of question in the WNBA is, yes, I agree. I think you're right that they need to go there. But at the same time too, if going there is, a material risk to the business, like, or the league folds. I think that's like, so it's like an interesting question of like, at what point as owners are you willing to invest in the league's growth?
Yeah.
You know, like, are you willing to run negative for X amount of years, you know, to be able to put that best foot forward and grow the business? Like, and that's a question that only the owners can answer.
But I think right now we've talked about, there's a part of it is that you've got to divide even within ownership of the new owners, Mark Davis with the Aces and some of the is Mark Davis the Aces? I'm suddenly making sure I've got that name right. The Raiders owner, and a couple others, Josiah with Liberty, who see that bigger picture and want to spend money to make money, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, and an older group of owners that bought in when this was cheaper and maybe don't have the pockets to do that and don't have, and then so that divide is still kind of hitting the WNBA, I think.
It could also be seen as a transition.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I want to take you to my jukebox.
I was just about to say we got to talk some Suns, man.
Yeah, we do. So if we haven't talked about them enough. So Phoenix, very interesting. I want to invite Gangstar into the podcast.
I love it. When I saw that this was coming, I'm like, holy cow, here we go.
Yeah, so it's been a while since I think Mass Appeal is the perfect song for Phoenix right now. Are you familiar with Gangstar?
I am a little. Like I'm not a lot, but I'm not terribly familiar with this song.
Okay. Well, essentially, there's this one line I really like in the song that I think, talks about the situation. Maybe a soul you'd sell to have mass appeal. And this is more just my personal take. Can they win? Yes. Are they title favorites? I don't think so. But the moves that they've made recently, super aggressive moves, with one goal in mind, an unwavering commitment to win a title. Once again, short-term versus long-term. It seems as though this is literally the definition of short-term thinking. Like, it's like if I had a dictionary, which I do, if I pulled it up, it'd be like, oh wow, this is exactly the entry. Like, this moment right now, short-term thinking. But you kind of have to ask yourself, what is the enduring appeal of mass appeal, and is it worth a soul? So I think this is kind of what I was hinting at before with, like, as an ownership group, as players, is it worth it? But most importantly, for the community, is that kind of investment worth it? And because it's going to be followed by, and mark my word, it's going to be followed by, it always is, like, years of just like, infertile land. Like that's how these things work. You roll the dice, you take a gamble, and then if you win big, and then it's just nothing for years and years and years. And it's just a lot of reminiscing. But I don't know, you get to hang up a banner. So I guess that's kind of my question, is like, why would you pursue mass appeal this way when you're doing it the right way? I mean, like Devin Booker, you're building it the right way. So I don't understand why they would take this the past few years, not just this year. The past few years, take this really hard, aggressive thing. It's almost like they're like repeating. It's just like a repetition of, remember, like the Clippers and like the Rockets. It's like it's just over in the Nets. It just happens over and over and over again. It's like you had Booker, you were doing it the right way. You had Monty Williams, Coach of the Year. You like, why go get Chris Paul? Then it's like, why star hunt, go get Kevin Durant? Now why get Bradley Beal? It seems as though they literally got off the train that Denver was on and tried to do it with, do this. I don't understand. All for mass appeal. I don't get it.
I get it. I will say this. We talked about during the finals, the impressive patience of both teams. Denver had built up and then didn't shake things up when Jamal Murray tore his ACL, and they didn't do well in the playoffs for a couple of years, or as well as they thought. They were patient. The Miami Heat might be the organization of patience. They kind of do win now. I mean, they have some win now stuff, but they build and develop guys. They are not short-term thinkers, and not many organizations show that kind of patience, Corey. Do they?
I know, but the thing about Phoenix, which is fascinating to me, is that you are in a place where you could. It's just like Denver. You are shielded, right? So it's not like you're LA, it's not like you're New York, it's not like you're Boston. Like you can actually do something the right way over a long period of time, but you're also Phoenix in the sense of like you're still a big market. Like you can still attract stars. People like going there. They have houses there, like playing golf. Like it could still, it's still a really interesting. It's like a best of both worlds thing. And like I said, they were doing it the right way. It's like halfway through, you're like, oh, like I know we built the foundation for this. Like let's just raise everything and just like do something completely different. I personally disagree with that. I think that is a very dangerous way to think about it because it's like all these like trends. It's like what does the market dictate, and then how quickly can we follow it? But then by the time you actually come to market with that new product, it's like, is it still in style or have they moved on? And that's the risk that Phoenix kind of takes here. It's like, it's just not, I would rather be like timeless style, enduring, like something like, like Ralph Lauren, where it's always fashionable, or like the Row versus like some of these like trendy, oh, this is hot for 2 weeks. And then we just totally forgot about 80s Metallica, or like, or like 2000s glitter, like, that had a moment for like 2 weeks and now we're on to something else. It's like,
wait, whoa, glitter's out.
You didn't get the note. You didn't get the memo.
Now I gotta go change my whole wardrobe, man.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's my take. It's
yeah.
Massive appeal.
That's a good point. I wonder if you asked fan bases, would they prefer being relevant over a longer period of time versus getting a banner and being irrelevant? Does that, like, what would a fan base choose? And I'm not gonna pretend to know the answer.
Yeah, I don't know the answer either. So NBA draft coming up, and I can tell you the fan base in San Antonio is thrilled. Can you walk me through your top 10?
Right. I put up a consensus mock draft at NBC Sports this week with the lottery picks. By the way, I got an email from a social media marketing firm today telling me that online, the Spurs seem to be the most optimistic fan base heading into the draft. Really, did I need a whole study on that one? Yeah. We'll run through. Excuse me. We'll run through the top 10 really quick. Obviously, no-brainer pick, Victor Wembanyama, number 1, and hopefully that works out as well as other number 1 picks have worked out for the Spurs. Number 2 is the Charlotte Hornets are interesting, but Michael Jordan met with Scoot Henderson, met with Brandon Miller. The vibes coming out of there and reports now coming out of there in the last 24 hours have been that they are leaning into Brandon Miller at number 2. He could do everything wing out of Alabama, and I kind of get that. But I'll just keep saying, Corey, we talked about this has a Jabari Smith. Oh no, it's Paolo Banchero feel about it. Like I'm not sure that that's how it's going to end up. That they don't trade the pick to somebody who's really high on. We'll see what happens. Number 3, Portland Trail Blazers really want them to take Brandon Miller because there's a lot of teams high on Scoot Henderson. They desperately want to trade out, and that's where it starts to get interesting. Zion Williamson's name has been mentioned. I don't think that one's going to happen, but I will tell you that Portland is interested. Portland would listen to a Zion Williamson-based trade, and look, the clearest sign that there's something going on with Zion in New Orleans, I mean, outside of the obvious frustration that everyone around the league has heard with Zion, they let Teresa Witherspoon go from their coaching staff, and that was the person closest to Zion. And you don't really see teams let go of the coach close to players when things are good. So it's a sign. I wouldn't be shocked if they traded the other one Mark Stein reported, which would be really interesting and not crazy, Paul George from the Clippers for the number 3 pick. And they decide to move on from the Paul George, Kawhi Leonard era because they don't think it's going to win. They got to move into a new building. And if you believe Scoot Henderson is a franchise star, then you can bring him into the new building as the anchor, and maybe that works. So anyway, those will be your top 3 picks in some order. I think there's a limited chance Portland ends up using that pick, that they will have traded it away or be picking for someone else. But that's the plan. Houston Rockets are trying to trade out at number 4. Somebody who goes 4 is going to take it. Amen Thompson, who is in a draft with crazy athletes. He is the best athlete. And he has got all sorts of all crazy high potential, all NBA potential. Right now, he just can't really score outside of 6 feet, which is an issue. But if he solves that, if he's a young kid who can develop a jumper as a 6'6" guard kind of player, the world's his ceiling. Like there's no ceiling. He could be crazy good. Number 5, Detroit Pistons. I have Cam Whitmore, Villanova. Corey, Villanova kids just know how to play, don't they? Like he's got. They've had bad luck with the draft lottery. I'm not sure they need another guy up front, but I like Cam Whitmore. Number 6, Orlando Magic, their first of their 2 lottery picks. Thank you, Chicago Bulls. Ausar Thompson from Overtime Elite, the brother of Amen Thompson. Not quite the off-the-chart athlete, but way more polished. He has a jumper. He's got an ability to run the game. Number 7, Indiana Pacers, Jarris Walker from Houston. I think if anybody's probably saw a lot of him because the Houston Cougars were really good. I think he's got, again, real potential, and he could be the kind of stretch 4, stretch big you put next to a Miles Turner type, and it's really interesting. Anthony Black to the Wizards at number 7. They're rebuilding. They could go a million directions. They could trade this, but Anthony Black has potential to be a really quality, high IQ point guard. Again, he needs to develop his shot, but he's got a lot of skills out of Arkansas. Number 9, Utah Jazz. Taylor Hendricks out of Central Florida. Probably the best defender in the draft. And I think if you put him, and he's got stretch 4 potential, like I could see him as a fit next to Walker Kessler for a decade up front. Like just defensive is like, it'd be a really interesting mix. Number 10, I'll tell you, one of the guys shooting up the draft board, Duke's Derek Lively has killed it in workouts. He was already at 7'1", looked like a good defensive center and rim runner. He's gotten into workouts and shown he can shoot, and suddenly everybody's like thinking sort of Brook Lopez-y. Like, hey, if this guy can space the floor as a 7'1" rim protector, we've got a modern center who can work. So I think that those guys are really interesting. I will throw in, because our producer Dan had asked, guy I hear keeps shooting up the board. Everybody goes to watch the Metropolitan 92s because, like, man, we got to go see what Wembanyama looks like. And I'll tell you, I did this in LA years ago where I'm like, the UCLA Bruins got this guy named Kevin Love. I got to go see this Kevin Love guy. And I walked out of the building going, who's Russell Westbrook? And how do you draft him? Right? And now you look back all the way on that team, which also had Drew Holiday, and think, how did they not win a national title? But that's a whole different discussion. But everybody went, and Bilal Koulibaly, we even looked this up, and I'm still butchering the pronunciation. The wing out of France, off that same team, has shut up draft boards. High IQ wing player, really fluid athlete, got some athleticism. He needs to develop, but people really like him after watching a lot of him. And he's a guy who's going to sneak into the lottery, I think, and was probably in the 20s or 30s at best before the season started. More people watched him the higher up the board he went. So that's the top 10 as I see it. And that doesn't even get into guys who I'm personally kind of high on. Like somebody's going to draft Cason Wallace, 6'3" point guard out of Kentucky, because the list, Corey, of Kentucky guards, like, I don't know how good he was in college. It's crazy. Like, I'm not really sure how good was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or De'Aaron Fox or Tyler Hero. Or
The Kentucky players translate really well to the NBA.
Yeah. If you ask them, they're kind of like, I got out of that. John Calipari plays an old school college system, and sometimes those guys will get out of those old school systems, and he coaches them up. They get out of those systems and they get into the NBA with spacing and pace, and they're like, hey, look what I can do.
Well, thank you for running us through that. It's very exciting because, I'm a Spurs fan, so clearly I'm excited. But now everyone else who aren't Spurs fans, can be maybe not just as excited as me.
I don't know about just as excited, but this is a draft really I mean, Miller, and I'm high on Scoot Henderson. Like I said, I've watched him play. I've met him. I'm high on him. Amen Thompson is a guy. Like, there's 4 or 5 guys, and there's always somebody drafted like 13 to 15 who suddenly, like, 2-3 years from now, we're like, how did we miss this guy?
Yeah, we missed
right. He really developed. There's a lot of those guys in this draft. This, I think, is going to turn out to be a really deep draft class. So good job, Wizards, waiting a year.
And last but not least, we like to end on a little bit of fun segment. I would like to invite our producer Dan into the podcast. So we can ask him some questions. But we also, have a question, and that is, hi Dan, welcome. What is your favorite moment from this past season? And I would love to hear what you think, Kurt.
Honestly, there were a few. Like, in terms of highlights, I kind of go back to your boy Victor Wembanyama. The missed 3 where he got his own rebound and put back dunked the play might be like the best highlight of the year. And even if it wasn't in the NBA, that was through the roof. But I think the other thing I enjoyed, I watched a lot more Heat basketball this year than I had in previous years, kind of trying to figure them out. And for some other reasons, was trying to figure them out. And to see their playoff run ended up being just a lot of fun. And not just because I got to go to Miami and eat in Little Havana, which, by the way, you got to do. But I enjoyed that playoff run. What about you, Corey?
Matt McClung dunk contest.
Oh, there you go.
I mean, first of all, I grew up on the dunk contest. In the All-Star Weekend was always a very special thing in my childhood, and to see a little bit of breathe back, a little bit of life back into that contest and back into that weekend, that was it was exhilarating. It really was. And, I counted him out. I even told you before, and I was like, okay, well, what's going on here? That was a sensational performance. What about you, Dan?
Well, as my first season of producer of PBT, just, hanging out with you guys every week has been pretty special for me, just given this opportunity. So thank you guys as the season's coming to an end. So this is like one of the highlights of my every week. But as a basketball fan, just talking and hearing you guys talk about the NBA, WNBA, and just professional basketball in general, that's been like my favorite part. But I would have to say, I guess, just specifically, I don't know, I guess seeing LeBron break the scoring record. I like LeBron. I'm not like the biggest stan, but I think that seeing that, just the longevity, the age he's putting up numbers, whether he's, the best of all time or whatever, that can be debated later, but you can't deny that for doing it as long as he has, being in the spotlight as long as he has, and pretty much delivering, since he was like 14, 15, I thought that was pretty cool. And that's a remarkable record. So I think that just seeing that and that whole spectacle was kind of, you never thought that would happen, but it happened. And now hopefully wait for the next person to do it. So, and we'll see if Victor can do it.
That was a good call, because that was one of those Joe DiMaggio 56 hit streak thing where you're like, nobody's ever going to do that, right? Like, I didn't think anybody'd get there.
And this is a really fun moment too, because Dan has allowed us, me and Kurt, to ask him a Mad Lib question. So I'm going to go ahead and start.
Yeah, please do.
I'm ready.
So there are these. I don't know if you knew this, but over half of the oldest companies in the world, older than 200 years, are all in Japan, apparently, according to this article by BBC. And I was curious, what, Dan, would be your business that you would want to last for over 200 years?
What business? Do I own the business, or like?
Yeah. So you got a family business, but you started today. Like some of these, like I'll give you an example. Like one is a hotel, one is a construction company that was around for 800 years or whatever. One was a tea shop that's still open. It opened in like 1080. So like you have a family business that you start today and you pass it on for 800 years or whatever.
That's a great. Honestly, just because we've talked about it before with my family, like just especially me and my middle brother, I would want to start like a restaurant. So one of our passions outside of everything is cooking. And coming from a Latin culture, we, meals are so important to us. So like, being around the family table and all that, and just enjoying food and culture So I definitely like a restaurant that, brings a lot of families together. That would be like my ideal situation and company to bring forth for, like, hopefully down the line my family can run as well. Just because we love food, like we celebrate food throughout all celebrations. So that'd probably be my best answer, like a restaurant that me and my brother would specifically help cook for.
What kind of food?
So we don't really specialize in anything. We do like a little bit of everything. So it would kind of just be like our favorites, from Italian but like a lot of Hispanic food and Spanish food. So like, since that's our roots. But anything like that. But we would do shrimp, seafood, steak, pastas, anything under the sun that we like, essentially, and hopefully that everyone else would like as well. Comfort food too, so a little bit of anything like that.
Wow, everything.
That's a good one, because a good question, Corey, because every week these questions would catch me like, I'd have to spend time thinking about them. They'd throw me off guard. So, all right, Corey, Dan, What is your spirit animal?
What is my spirit animal? Oh man. I would like to go with like a wolf. I would go with a wolf. Just because I see myself, I know it's so super generic, but I do like being around people, and like obviously wolf pack mentalities, like protect each other. And kind of goes back to like family. Like, family is so important to me, as well as friends. So like having that sense of family and a close members together, I would say a wolf. But I also like can lead. I feel like I'm a leader as well. So
you said a camel?
I can lead. So like, hopefully I can be a leader. No, you're good. I can be like a group leader. Okay. No, you're totally good. I hope to be like a pack leader, hopefully, in that. So, but always, the betterment of the group. So I think that's my spirit animal. I like the best of both worlds.
Wow, that's a wolf is good. Wolf is good. My last question, I think we'll only get two. My last question is, if you could be the foremost collector in the world in a subject, what would you collect? Like, if a museum is like, man, like whatever, it could be anything. Like, oh, we got to call, I know this guy, he's the best in the world. He has the best collection of whatever item you want. We got to call him.
Even though there could be a museum. I'm gonna go with Legos, because some of those things are so rare and they get pretty pricey. And I mean, it's also a toy though, so like you can play with them. So I would say Legos, just because you can almost you let your imagination run wild kind of with it, and it's just like Lego World would be kind of cool. Have their own museum, and just like start. So I would say Legos, just because the kid in me love them.
Are Legos like, I don't know, like Star Wars figurines or something? Like, once you open the box, they're less valuable? Or I genuinely don't know the answer.
That's a good question. It does change the answer.
I don't think so, because for the most part, the box can contain it, but like I feel like you would want to see them. So I don't really think so. So I don't know. Once I become the unequivocal master of Legos, an expert, I'll come back to this question.
Have you ever been to one of the Lego worlds?
I have not. It's on the bucket list of hopefully one day when I can produce something. Maybe we will do an episode in Lego World.
There we go. It's worth doing, even if it's. I mean, at least the one out here in Southern California is definitely aimed at kids. Like, we took our kids there, but you also walk through going, "Holy cow! That's like the entire New York skyline or whatever." Like, laid out in Legos. It's
a whole city, and it's just like I mean, there's a show called Lego Master Builders, and they have like 8 hours to build like a superstructure, and I'm just like, I make a stick in about 8 hours, so but these people are making renditions of like the Mona Lisa, or like like the Chicago skyline with the river being green up to like, it's amazing. So it's just kind of cool, just like to have that imagination, but like being able to do whatever and see and picture something and like create it.
I got no questions. I'm not trying to top Legos. No.
Thank you so much, Dan. And Kurt, it's always a pleasure.
This is always one of the highlights of my week too, so I'm always happy.
And I will see you next week after the draft. Hopefully we get some good news in San Antonio.
I think you're safe.
See you next week.